Hey, welcome back to the news, everybody. Going into the third week of January, Dave, you know what that means. We're right in the middle of ski jumping season on television. I know you're a big fan.
Yeah, huge fan. The only thing I like about ski jumping is that the Japanese guy keeps winning this year, and his name is Kobayashi, from The Usual Suspects.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking more Star Trek, but I'm kind of
one of the World Cup events yesterday. He beat out two of the Poles, I think, and
yeah, that's right. Yeah. He's untouchable at the moment. He's about to break the all-time streak record. If he wins the next event, I don't think anyone's ever won 8 World Cup events in a row.
Well, I can hardly wait.
Yeah. Way to keep the flow going
sarcasm,
there, John. You don't get to be sarcastic and do the little drop-offs like that. That's my job.
Anyway, today's a big day in Poland. As we record this, it's Sunday, the 13th, and the WOSP, I can't talk.
He's fluent, people.
Wielka Orkiestra Świąteczna Pomocy. Mike, is there like an official translation for that?
Yeah, the one I've come across the most often is just the Great Orchestra of Christmas Charity.
Okay.
And today is the grand finale, because this is something that goes on for a couple of days, weeks in advance. There's events here and there, charity auctions, etc. But today's like the grand finale. In all the major cities, people are collecting money.
Yeah, you see these; they're everywhere. They got the little sticker with the red heart, and let me take another shot at this. WOSP. There, I said it right. WOSP. It's the 25th year. They started in 1993. This is their 25th year. Curious to see how much money they raise. Yeah, 20.
I thought they were saying it's the 27th. Wait, is that math?
93 to 2018.
Arguing about children's charity class.
2019, actually.
2000. That's what I said. 2019, I think.
Anyway, sometime in the past.
Last year they raised 124 million zlotys. Very, very impressive. And what they do with the money, they most of it goes to facilities, machines, supplies for children's hospitals or the children's ward of general hospitals. They buy the kind of stuff that maybe the government can't afford. We'll get to that in just a second. But there are clinics, there are hospitals in this country where almost 80% of the machinery that they use was donated by the WOSP, the money raised by this charity drive. Now, you would think that a charity organization that raises money, a lot of money, for children, especially sick children, would be immune from criticism. But in fact, it's not the case, Mike.
No, a lot of people have a lot of bad things to say about this charity for many reasons. I guess the first one is something we were talking about off the air earlier, is just, why do we need a private charity when we're already paying, high taxes and fees for socialized healthcare in this country? Why does our healthcare suck so much that we need to all get together once a year? And
this is a doctor talking, by the way.
Yeah, well, I see it every day right now where I work. So there's a lot of money going into the system. It just basically disappears. It's ineffectually spent. It's a bureaucracy. A lot of money is lost just on administration. But yeah, then people are wondering, we're putting so much money into this system and we still need a charity to buy, basic equipment. I mean, you have people, some of the things the charity has bought, it's not just, expensive high-end equipment, but beds and chairs, stethoscopes,
Yeah, just to be clear, this is not a criticism of the charity, obviously. It just raises legitimate questions about how money is spent by the government, right? This always reminds me of something. Quick story, I'll tell you. This reminds me of something that I've seen a couple of times. There is a hospital here in Krakow, in Prokocim, the suburb of Prokocim, a children's hospital, dedicated children's hospital. And it's meant to be the best hospital of that kind in this part of the country. And I'm hardly qualified to evaluate that, so I'll just agree. Fine, it's the best hospital like that in the country for kids. But when you go there, you'll see a big plaque on the wall that tells you that the hospital was built with funds donated by the American government. I forgot the year. I think it was 1980, 85, 87, something like that. So the hospital was built fully funded by the American government. Okay. So on top of that,
here he goes.
On top of that, and wait a second. On top of that, a few years ago, the same hospital set up a Ronald McDonald House. If you don't know what that is, it's a place funded by McDonald's.
Who doesn't know who Ronald McDonald is?
Wait a minute. The Ronald McDonald House?
Yeah, it's like McDonald's is charity.
Yeah, but nobody in Poland knew that until a few years ago because they didn't have one. Yeah.
So they thought Ronald McDonald House was what? Some Scottish philanthropist.
They didn't know before he
sees another day for McDonald's.
He jumps into savage me before he knows that they didn't know.
They didn't know.
It was complete. Go out on the street right now and stop 100 people and see how many know what it is. I'll bet you a third of them maybe know.
And that's only
Dave's quiet now. He just got beat back down into his place. Anyway, just trust me on this. Until it was set up a few years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, nobody in Poland knew what the Ronald McDonald House was. Of course, most of you listening know it's a place where the parents of children who are in the hospital for an extended period can stay free of charge. It's a great charity.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No matter what you think. See, thank you, Josh.
I'm just saying the name is a bit of a giveaway.
Well, it lets you know what company it's involved in. It doesn't tell you what it does.
Anyway.
That's all I meant.
It's a great charity. Make fun of McDonald's if you want. But anyway.
I'm not making fun of McDonald's. I worked for McDonald's.
The point is,
and it was a good education.
The point is, best hospital for kids in this part of the country. The American government built it. Ronald McDonald houses the parents. My question is, hey, Polish government, do you want to jump in here at some point and maybe pay for something? Because the Christmas charity orchestra, the charity that we're talking about now, pays for a lot of the equipment. McDonald's pays for the place for the parents to stay. The American Congress pays for the hospital. Where's the Polish government role in this hospital?
Actually,
I'll calm down now.
Okay. Well, this might, rev your engines again. The hospital, actually, the U.S. cut its ties with the hospital years ago, mainly because a lot of the money they were sending there kind of wasn't going where it was supposed to be going. We're talking 20, 30 years ago, but yeah, they weren't too happy with the way the money was spent there. But I guess where we want to talk about what's going on here, we have to really wind it back and go back to how this charity began and who was in charge of it. The guy in charge is called Jacek Owsiak.
He's like the face of this. He's
everywhere. The face. Yeah. He's the founder. He's the head of the board, et cetera, et cetera. He's a guy in his mid-60s, and his background is kind of not super eventful, but he was born in Gdańsk, raised in Warsaw, went to the Fine Arts Academy there, and he became involved with a lot of musical groups, radio, talk shows, host stuff like that. He organized concerts, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that's where he made a lot of connections in that, in those spheres. And and he was a radio host as well in the 90s, and he used that as the starting off point to start this charity in 93. Then they started collecting money for cardiological departments in hospitals, children's hospitals. They collected a couple of million zlotys, not so much. Then the next year they collected a little more money for different wings of different hospitals for different equipment for children. And they just started growing in the 90s, 5 million, 10 million. Then in the 2000s they hit the double digits. And then a couple of years ago they were at 50 million. And 3 years ago, 75 million, 100 million. Off, yeah. Last year, 125 million. They were on TV basically from the beginning. And he's actually said that TV was the thing that really got us going here because it's a big event on Polish television. And he was with the public broadcaster for years and years and years until the 16th or 17th year of this charity, but then he got angry with them that they weren't showing it enough on television, they weren't showing it live, so he switched over, and now he's with TVN, which are talking about this nonstop. They make press conferences, it's on the news station, it's on their main network now in the afternoon. They show the concerts going on everywhere. There are auctions on Allegro, the Polish equivalent of eBay, that you can buy stuff from celebrities, a football from a famous athlete, or the helmet that somebody wore to K2, etc.
So surely he made some enemies in this process. Then.
In fairness, the Brits have the Red Nose Day, but that's for kids abroad, isn't it? That's foreign aid, isn't it?
We have children in need, don't we? I think that's for kind of children's hospitals in Britain. I don't know. I don't know what the figures are. I mean, I'm afraid.
No, I remember.
Sorry for interrupting.
In Australia, one of those was the red nose. I think was for SIDS, sudden infant death.
A lot of countries have something like that, I'm sure.
That's a very interesting history of the charity. I've learned a lot in this episode of the KrakCast. I really didn't know. A
lot of the reason that people dislike Owsiak, though, is that he's known as being very outspoken with his politics. He's definitely on one side, not the other. He talks about peace, love. He's all a very pro-hippie kind of mentality.
When he says peace, it's P-E-A-C-E. That's not the other piece.
That's a great combination there. But they also people that are a little more, say, prude, think he's very kind of hedonistic, do what you want kind of mentality. And one of the things he does every year now as well for 20 odd some years is organize a rock festival in Poland as a free rock festival, I should underline, for all the volunteers and supporters of this. And it's a huge event. It goes on in Koszalin, I think, which is right on the border with Germany.
Polish Woodstock?
Yeah, it was called actually Woodstock Station or Polish Woodstock for years. They just changed the name now to cringeworthy Pole and Rock Festival.
You see what they did there?
Yeah, I had to look at it a couple times to realize that it was real. It's going to look cringy. But since it's on the border of Germany, and it brings in some big acts once in a while, nobody who's huge right now, but they had the Prodigy like 6 years ago.
Big enough, yeah.
Yeah. So and the really all types of music, and it's free, so people just swarm it. It's like the whole city is one big tent festival for a week, and we're talking 400, 500, 600. There's even been over 700,000 people there at that given moment, not going through it, it's in the millions, but for like one day events,
it's a lot of portable toilets.
Oh yeah, it becomes a huge mud fest, hedonistic, and a lot of people like criticize Ovchak for that. There's a lot of stuff going on there that's dodgy.
But it seems to me the
alcohol,
criticism
sex.
is also kind of related to the fact that he seems to be a little too self-promoting, and maybe his motivations behind the charity are not completely selfless.
I mean, he's also making money off of this, but this is his job. But I was just looking at the stats now. The 25th Orchestra, they raised like 105 million, and for quote unquote like administration, organizing, and all that stuff, they spent about just over 5 million. So less about 4.5%.
Seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Yeah, that still means he could be making hundreds of thousands. But
you know what? With this year's charity event, which is taking place today, they're going to cross a billion zlotys in the history of the charity. I think that has to buy you a lot of goodwill, even if you're not a saint behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's this whole thing was like a Polish national institution. I've been, a little bit educated today to hear all this stuff. I have to say, I always equated it a bit like Red Nose Day in the UK. Josh, did you have the same kind of thing?
Yeah, more or less exactly.
Never really gave it a second thought. I have to be honest.
Oh, and I think one thing we need to mention to our listeners as well is like whenever you give money to these kids or whoever's with walking around with the can, you get a little red heart sticker.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of people go for it right away just because when you have the heart sticker, when they come around,
they'll leave you alone.
I already paid. It's good.
If you're out and about, you can be approached easily 10, 15 times.
I gave at the office, which is probably why they do it on a Sunday, so you can't have that excuse. Yeah.
I'm wondering how the stores being closed is going to affect this. Since people aren't in malls, they used to be around the malls all the time.
I ain't got to stand around outside.
Good question.
In January.
Moving on. First, before we cover this story, let's discuss a fundamental aspect here. How do you pronounce the name of this company from China that makes starts with an H?
Huawei.
Huawei.
I remember when their phones first hit the market in Dublin. In Dublin, everyone says Huawei, and that was the name they were giving it. I see you got a new Huawei there.
Mike, what's your take on this?
I've heard like Huawei as well, like where it's more like an H kind of to the back of your throat. But I think Huawei now is like the most common.
Definitely, they should have rethought this. They should have been more careful when they launched the brand because. This is just a mouthful.
Xiaomi or whatever.
Well, anyway, they're in the news. They're in the news this week in Poland. A very interesting story. Very curious to see how this is going to play out. An arrest made involving espionage, Dave.
Espionage, indeed, John.
Yeah. Now, first of all, and I have to say, it's difficult for us to dive into this if we don't first acknowledge the fact, and this might be news to some of you listening, industrial, economic, military espionage is kind of a Chinese thing. Sorry, I'll be the first to say it. This is what they do, Dave, and they've been caught. Give us. Yeah, I know. Give us the details of what's going on here.
Well, it's a juicy story because it ties back into the arrest in Canada recently of Meng Wanzhou, who's the daughter of Ren, whatever his name is, Ren.
Like one of the bosses of the company.
The owner, the founder, Ren Zhengfei, was a former engineer in the PLA. So that's where all the rumours go back to. That it was founded by an ex-military officer of the Chinese government, and his daughter was recently arrested in Canada and held on suspicion of espionage in Canada. The Canadians, I think we can
diplomatic
agree.
Issue here.
I think we can agree the Canadians are not known for aggressively snatching people on their soil and causing.
They apologized, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm just showing there was some serious, allegations to be proved here. And basically, China, has been backdooring the entire world with these technologies now for a long time. The US government made a very sensible decision years ago to decide not to let China bid on any public contracts with their network equipment. There's a simple question to be asked. If China wants to be treated as the mature elder statesman of the world, it seems to be, they need to allow the same type of interference in their own domestic markets and allow European contractors to come in and bid on Chinese contracts. Until then, I don't want to hear anything about Hawaii infesting our networks. You know?
So Huawei, whatever it's called, this is founded by a guy from the PLA, the People's Liberation Army.
Yeah.
So basically, you're dealing with Huawei, you're dealing with the Chinese army, which of course is a tool of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, they'd be at pains to deny that, of course. And of course, by bringing to market exciting products like smartphones, that's how they got everyone's attention. Now, if you're walking around and you get one of their phones in your pocket, that's a powerful kind of marketing tool. That says this company is like Apple or it's like Microsoft. This is the Chinese version. But, Chinese companies are not the same as European and American companies.
We have to remember one thing about Chinese companies is that according to Chinese law, a Chinese company has to basically open up all its servers, all its information to the government. And we're not talking about, there's an investigation, we need to know what's going on. It's the government can have ongoing look into your information, even stuff that you're doing in other countries. So if you have a phone in your pocket made by a Chinese company and you're signing on to a Chinese service, basically, they can check whatever they want without any type of due process.
Let's bring it back to this arrest in Poland. So, by the way, the arrest was made by, I guess you can call it the counterintelligence agency. What does the arrest have to do with what's he accused of? Do we know?
They haven't actually said. What we know is who was arrested. We know the director of sales, I believe, was the guy who was arrested from Huawei. And
Wang Weijing.
Sounds like a bad joke. And the other guy who was arrested works for Orange.
The Polish guy.
Yes, Polish. But up until 2011, he was working ABW, so the Agency of Internal Security. So a guy in charge of and he was in the department dealing with a lot of cybersecurity issues.
A lot of intrigue here.
Yeah. And he was working for Orange, and Orange is a company that... We also have to mention the fact that Huawei doesn't make just smartphones. A lot of the money it makes off of is routers, servers, equipment that's like the backbone of the internet, 5G networks, 4G networks, etc.
Now, Huawei yesterday, they announced...
Just to interrupt, John. The problem is, all over Europe, this equipment's already installed. These are all private contracts. We can't just go to, the French telecoms and say, hey, tell us who you bought your routers off. They'll tell you to go and sing, But that is the issue. They're already
French, though.
They're already in the European networks, and all network equipment is known as a backdoor, an easy place to put a backdoor. So I think the horse is already bolted the stable on this one. Really,
Huawei has announced just yesterday. They announced. I don't know if Huawei Poland is like a separate entity or if it's directly from headquarters in China. I don't know, but this guy has been fired. I don't know if this is part of an act to kind of pretend they have no idea what's going on, or if the guy's going to disappear on some diplomatic plane out of Warsaw on his way to Beijing. Who knows? But yeah, if you're dealing with a very big Chinese company, you are dealing with the Chinese government. There's the line is very blurry, right, between the two. And so I'm curious about this Polish guy, if he's kind of the local fixer or broker for some kind of plan. I mean, selling intelligence, buying intelligence. Which way is it going?
Or just might be setting up the equipment in a way that will be most beneficial to the Chinese to collect information. Because you have to remember, Poland is a NATO country. A lot of transactions go through Poland. Even if something is not specifically happening in Poland, Poland will have information about something that they might want.
The whole world is ordering their 5G equipment at the moment. And by some estimates, Hawaii, or whatever you want to call them, account for about 25% of the orders. 25% of the hardware going into the next great wave of technology. 5G is going to change everything. All big data projects, all the Internet of Things, all of that was predicated on the speed and the latency that will be delivered by 5G. A friend of mine works for Intel. There's huge plans to revolutionize the world with 5G. It's not just another technology. The chips that are coming out now that are going to be fitted into every item around the world, everything from cars to dishwashers to fridges. I don't really understand how it's going to revolutionize the world, but that's what people are saying.
Sounds like the kind of story that's just begging for conspiracy theories.
Well, it's just the point being that, backdoors are going to become more and more powerful as we connect more and more of our devices. This is happening. There is no question that the Internet of Things is something that the biggest firms on earth are preparing for right now. And there's nothing sinister about it. It's supposed to deliver, technological solutions to real problems, and it could be one of the great advances of the human race. But if it's all built with Chinese equipment, that's something we need to seriously take a look at, you know?
Yeah, but when
Not
you
that
have,
we can't trust the Chinese.
when you have when you have mega players like this, and the diplomatic angle, the business angle, so much money on the table, this is not the kind of thing that is investigated and publicized like a typical case of industrial espionage. That's what I'm getting at. And I can easily imagine a situation where a very high level phone call takes place and this kind of disappears from the front page.
Well, it's not disappearing anytime soon because it's a huge story. And you have to remember the fact that there's a lot of money involved here, not just Huawei, but just China, is the trade center of the world right now. So whenever something like this happens, they use their economic muscle to get things going their way. You have a trade war going on with the U.S. right now. This all plays into it.
Well, not that Donald articulates it very well, but dumping is a huge issue. It's something that China has gotten away with massively over the last 15 years. I mean, that's why state companies, it's something it's poorly understood by the general public, the effects of dumping and the strategic nature of it. But there's no doubt, if you could say that one state in the world has a grand plan economically to kind of take over, it's China. Of course.
So, actually, I'm going to interrupt, sorry, Dave, because some people may not be familiar with what dumping is, but dumping is basically when you willingly take a loss on a product, you sell it very cheaply in order to drive away all the competition.
For market share, yeah.
Of course, as well, we should never forget that China is still a deeply poor country without a fully convertible currency, which shouldn't be taken seriously to the point of Death Star in the sky going to take us all over.
Not yet.
But we should certainly pay close attention to what is clearly a strategy of theirs to gain leverage in our democracies, in our decision-making process, and in the way we develop technologies at great expense. At great expense, technologies are developed in the West and then stolen by China.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, if anybody has the nerve to kind of stand up to them, they can always hold the weapon of access to their market over your head. If you really want to sell to China, are you really going to push this point? It's a tough call for any Western company to if they want to press Beijing on the subject of industrial economic espionage. Beijing can say, okay, no more of your stuff in our market. Let's move on to a bit of an update on something we talked about last week. Tragic news in Koszalin in the north, where 5 teenage girls died in an accident at an escape room. And in response, the Warsaw government, ordered inspections for all escape room businesses in the entire country to check, the safety of the facilities they use, and just do a careful examination to make sure everything's all right. And they examined just over 500 such businesses, 500 escape rooms in the whole country, and they found some kind of violation in 433 of them. Let's call it.
Wow.
What is that? 90%, basically. Now, I'm sure, and this is not to criticize the effort, but I'm sure that they ticketed these businesses for every little possible thing, from licensing to
dirty plates in the sink.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dust on the windowsill. It's kind of hard to find fault with the idea, and this is going to have some serious consequences for the escape room business for a while. But is this really going to help anything, or is this just the government kind of reacting in a panic to just do anything to show that they were concerned?
In 2014, there were 22 escape rooms in America, and now there's 2,300. I think what's happening here, and it's going to be not to use a joke that's inappropriate, but it's going to be a mass cull, basically. And then we're going to go back to basics, and the authorities are going to say, okay, we're not standing by any of these existing ones, but if you want to open one now, here's some serious fire regulations. We understand it's an inherently fire dangerous practice, but it can be done safely. It is a growing industry all around the world. It might be interesting to see if that completely kills the market in Poland. A lot of the places and the buildings that they're in are totally inappropriate and, absolutely tragic consequences. So I wouldn't be surprised if nearly every one of the ones that is closed down is for mostly good reasons, but eventually I would see the industry kind of making a comeback in a different...
I think maybe the nature of the escape room business is such that a lot of them were using what you might call marginal building facilities. Just not Class A office space. Exactly.
They were kind of turning some cash flow. It was look at this quick new business, but now people are realizing if you want to do it, you got to do it right, I
mean, the reason it exploded, so it became so popular, is because it was generally quite simple to set up. If you had an apartment free like this, you just a few doors, a few themed rooms, and you were good to go. Not necessarily much investment, and there were no specific safety regulations about this. So it had to just fulfill standard housing regulations. Well, now a lot of people are saying maybe you should have the same kind of safety regulations as you have for concert halls or for cinemas and stuff like that. We'll see where this goes.
I saw a lot of criticism online, people saying things like, well, hell, why don't you put this kind of effort and determination into examining restaurants and kitchens and,
they do
health violations
they have
and
an
stuff like that.
extremely strict system of managing that in Poland, I can assure you.
How hard is it enforced?
What I would argue for, if you're going to enforce something massively in terms of public oversight, is carbon monoxide poisoning, and the deaths are still way too high in this country. There's still way too many people dying in their sleep from that.
I'll be honest, that's something I think I've mentioned before. Just I do not understand. There are carbon monoxide detectors have been available for decades.
Yes, and they're very cheap, and anyone can install their own carbon monoxide alarm. They just stick on the wall. You don't even have to put it on the wall. You can just take it out of the box, make sure it's charged, and put it on the counter.
You have so many regulations and requirements when you have a gas boiler in your house. You have to have somebody come by yearly and check the ventilation, but a simple rule is like you have to have a carbon monoxide detector. It's not on the books. I don't understand why. It's cheap, it's easy, and it works.
It does.
Just kind of a side aspect to this issue. Again, nothing funny about it, but terrible. A good example of terrible timing. There was a horror movie called Escape Room that was meant to come into cinemas this week.
Oh no!
And
Somebody's gone bankrupt there.
The distributor of the film, well, they pushed back the Polish release. I think it opened in other countries as planned. I don't know if they're going to release it at all in Poland. If they do, I'm sure it'll be some time from now. But it's just too soon and too terrible of a tragedy. So they made the right decision just holding off on the release of a movie called Escape Room just 2 weeks after this terrible tragedy. So, well, let's move on to something else. Speaking of movies, let's talk about a movie that was released to great success. This is a movie, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I think we all agreed that we were going to go see this, and none of us did. Did we go see Claire?
No.
A movie that we talked about quite a bit.
I've been watching the popular series Blinded by the Lights by HBO. It's excellent.
Yeah, well, okay. We'll get to that some other time. A nice attempt at distraction. But we talked about this movie, Claire. Hugely successful. Mike, give us a quick recap of the bullet point version of what the movie's about.
Basically, this movie kind of jokes and makes fun of the life of priests in Poland, like the hypocrisies, from having relationships to, I don't think there's anything about pedophilia in there, but, drinking, how in little towns, people look up to their priests almost as being, royalty. And it just makes the standard jokes about priests.
My wife went to see it. It has a very dramatic ending from what she told me. Sounded actually more interesting than I'd given it credit for when she described it, although she didn't enjoy it.
Well, the reason it's in the news this week is because it officially broke the record and became the biggest, most financially successful, biggest box office success in Polish history.
What was the previous number one?
Post 1989. They make a distinction between pre and post 1989. The previous top spot went to a film called Ogniem and Mieczem, Fire and Sword, which was an adaptation of a Sienkiewicz novel. 2000 or 99 or 2000, I think it was.
I was hoping you'd be embarrassed and you wouldn't know.
Part of the reason that was number one for so long was because that was the kind of movie that every school kid in Poland had to go see. So every school basically went and they inflated,
your teacher's got a hangover.
Yeah.
Out comes Gandhi.
And
It
they
used to be in my
inflated the
school.
numbers.
My left foot. That was a classic.
And Claire did not enjoy this kind of support, being the adult movie that it is, so to speak. No fourth graders were taken to go see Claire. You can be sure. So you can
it
look
wouldn't
at
really be appropriate. John.
this record is we can look at this record as kind of legitimate in a way that the previous record was not.
Gandhi's inspiring, man.
So here's the thing: none of us have seen the biggest money making movie in Polish history,
because we know it's going to be, at best, well made and artfully acted, and there's absolutely no way it's not going to be boring. I just know it is.
It's basically just a screenplay made up of priest jokes. I mean, all the jokes, they just put it into a narrative.
Yeah,
very much
a lot of
unlike
cliches.
the popular HBO drama Blinded by the Lights, which is compelling, well acted, and very well paced.
I think this is like the third episode where you've mentioned Blinded by the Lights.
Have I?
Yeah.
Well, have you received that check yet?
Anyway,
He just likes all the boobs on HBO.
We're going to finish up on a note about vacations here. Some of you listening might not know that as of, tomorrow will be the first free day, students in Krakow and Małopolska, actually, and in a couple of other województwa, if I'm not mistaken, they have 2 weeks off. It's called feria, winter holidays, winter break. And different regions in Poland have their break at a different time to kind of, Mike, tell us the point of kind of this rotating schedule of winter holidays.
Well, if we're winter holidays, you have to realize that most people want to go skiing in the mountains. So that means if everybody was off at the same time, Zakopane, which is usually really crowded,
Everybody goes to Zakopane.
it would just be a nightmare. So they basically release these 1 week separation. So like for the first week, 5 voivodes to start, then 5 weeks after, and then a week after the next 5, and a week after the next 5. So there's never a one moment where everybody.
And it's different every year. Like this is really early. This is really early this year. I think it might be the first week that schools are off. It could be as late as the end of February, I think. Right?
Yeah, because it goes on until every voivodeship has had its time off. So it would last until like mid-February.
You could get lucky or unlucky when it comes to ski conditions, depending on where you live. Right?
Usually, it's like the people that start now aren't very lucky, but as people have noticed looking out the window, it's been quite chilly and snowy the last couple of weeks.
I was up in Zakopane last weekend. It is epic looking up there. I was only on my way home that I learned that the avalanche risk is at its highest for a long, long time. So
did you
be
go
careful
skiing?
out there, kids.
Are you a skier?
No, I was visiting my family who ski. No, skiing is one of the least safe ways to descend a mountain, in my opinion.
Josh, are you a skier?
Not at all, no. Cable car is my preferred method of coming down a mountain.
I don't know. They say that everybody goes skiing. Do they really?
I've tried it, and I broke several ribs. It's very dangerous.
I mean, I skied. I remember there were photos of me as a kid when I was like a toddler. My dad putting me on skis on the street, and when we lived in Australia, we went skiing because we were Polish, and apparently that's what we did. And I haven't actually never been skiing in Poland. Ever since I moved to Poland, I have not gone skiing.
Well, these days, package skiing tours to Austria, to Italy, very accessible. Finding they're not that expensive, and in fact, people have told me that they can even be roughly the same price as the same skiing holiday in Poland. What do you call it? The mountain pass. What do you call it? The ski pass? I think.
Actually, they've had that issue in Poland.
They're crazy expensive here.
They were expensive, and there wasn't like one company or one pass for a very long time. It's like every single route was a different pass, different company. They've only unified most of it recently.
And obviously, the skiing conditions in Italy and Austria are far superior to what you find here.
The quality of the service is better. Yeah.
The price is a lot lower in Poland. I can assure you from several people I know who have skied in many different locations.
Okay, then
the day passes are very reasonable.
Maybe it's cheap for a reason. I've heard skiing is better on the Slovakian side.
It is. Hua-what is the biggest part of the Tatras, and it's got the biggest resort in the Tatras, so they could probably claim the title.
Listen, none of us are skiers. None of us are skiers, but we're telling everybody about good skiing conditions.
Trust me, Zakopane is beautiful, man. It's a seriously impressive mountain range. Yeah.
It's impressive, but
the town is really coming on. Everyone's like, they're overdeveloping Zakopane, and that's true to an extent. But actually, people are quite good at building things these days, and some of the stuff they've built looks quite nice to me. It's gone from being just the main strip to having a bit more depth to it around. A lot of nice new shops, restaurants starting to pop up, and
the traffic.
It really needs an injection.
Is a nightmare coming in and out.
It really needs an injection of decent quality bars and pubs, which it doesn't really have, which is not easy to grow.
What about the traffic? How much time did you spend getting in and out? I've heard it's like 7 hours from here to.
I was okay on the way up, but you can certainly be unlucky. My family were 6 hours from the airport all the way up. They got 2 crashes on the way. So yeah. Plus, it's snowing so heavy at the moment that slows everything down as well.
And you have to remember, this is only 100 or so kilometers away from Krakow. So you would think 100 kilometers an hour or so.
Oh, we should say they're building a high-speed train line, the longest new train line built in Poland since the war, and it's going to go direct to Zakopane from Krakow, and it's going to be built it's going to be finished in about 8 years, I think.
How about the new road? Haven't we been waiting on a new road forever from here to Zakopane?
I've heard about that road ever since I moved here. It's it's going to be done next year. It's going to be done next year.
Like a mythical
18
thing
years
now.
later.
Oh, it's so easy carving a big road into a mountain, isn't it? Come on, boys. Give us a break.
They've got all the pegs with the string connecting them out.
Look at what the Swiss did in the 90s. Remember the tunnel they built through the Alps? That's one of the most phenomenal feats of engineering in the history of humankind. They have a bit of a built-in advantage on us. Like, people have been living in the Alps, and
perhaps they could sell their mountain boring kit. Not too. Yeah, okay.
Not too boring. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's
Speaking
not go back
of bores.
to the bores. No, but what?
Is that a bore joke? I'm so lost.
Speaking of bores, if you're wondering why we didn't talk about it in the news, and it's been all over social media this week, the big bore call approved by the government, we actually recorded a separate episode to talk about that. It'll go up in a couple of days after this news goes up, so keep an eye out for that. Also, this is the first episode in a long time when we haven't talked about Wisła Krakow. That's because, again, we recorded another episode about that. We had one last week. If you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it. It's called Wisła Krakow is Totally Fucked Up. That's the title. And we're recording another one today. It'll be up in a few days to give you an update on the tragic comedy Is that a word? Tragicomedy?
Tragic comedy with a hyphen is a word.
The tragicomic events at WSP Krakow. So keep an eye out for that. Guys, anything else for this episode of the news?
No,
I think we're all
that's
news
about
out.
it. You know everything you need to know. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Like I said, look out for our episodes about boar killing and WSP Krakow, and we'll see you next time on the KrakCast News.